Today's session is Best Practices for Matching Industry Color Standards. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Lou Prestia, Product Line Manager, and Heather Blakely, Product Marketing Specialist. So without further delay, let's begin our presentation. Heather, it's all yours.
Thank you, Yale. Hello again to everyone who joined us the previous two color webinars, and welcome if this is your first time. So before we begin, let's start by asking you a question related to your current color verification procedures. The question is, how do you verify your color precision? And you will see the poll questions on your screen displayed now. Please take a moment to answer these poll questions, and we will review the results in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and start with the agenda that Lou and I have prepared for you today. First, we will cover a quick introduction to press standards. We will be walking you through the history behind these press standards and describing their importance. This way you can differentiate your business and your customers will have a reference of the color quality that they can actually expect. You will learn about the press certification programs that are available today, and those are the IDEAlliance Digital Press Certification and the Fogra Certification Validation Printing System. We'll then utilize all this knowledge and actually put it into practice so that you can use these certifications and match your reference on your digital front end. Then we'll be giving you clear next steps in order for you to have a color-controlled environment that your customers will not only notice but also value. The last topic is about a different set of standards. These are the standards that should be followed in a print facility besides just color. So we will be discussing the image quality standards, and these are necessary to produce a perfect PDF that exactly reflects the document that the designer intended for the printed output. And as usual, we will wrap up by giving you resources. This way you can put all of the knowledge into practice, and we will be following up with a Q&A session at the end and answer as many questions as time permits. Now, Lou will get us started with the best practices for matching industry color standards. So Lou, take it away.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get a little further into our discussion about press standards and also certification programs that are available for representing that you have matched a press standard with your digital equipment, I want to start with some basic definitions as I typically do. Let's start by talking about what a press standard is. A press standard serves to tell the print buyer what to expect. That is maybe the most important thing about the press standard, all the business that you can drive from matching a standard aside, and we're going to talk about that. But the single most important thing you can say about a press standard is that it tells your buyer what to expect, what the print will look like. So it's very important for that reason. It also gives the buyer a reference to compare your work to, because if they've been buying color that you say is matching some standard like ISO V2, the Fogra standard, and then one day the color looks different, they're going to probably want to see you measure some strip and show some calculations to show that you're still matching the color, which you may not be. There's also a big value in press standards for you as a print producer, because the standard, or the press reference as we sometimes call it, gives you something to defend yourself with. It's a way to say, I am matching color, or this certain reference for color, and I know I am, and you can demonstrate that to your customers. The thing that complicates this whole business is the fact that most print buyers, and you can attest to this probably, and maybe even some print providers, don't really know how to measure or monitor their conformance with the standard. So they may say, yes, I print to the SWOP reference or GRACoL or ISO or what have you, but particularly on the print buyer end, they don't have any way to find out if that's really true. You can add a lot of value as a print provider if you're not already doing this, and I know many of you are, by picking a standard, working to match a standard on your different sheets and different output devices, and then monitoring that conformance and being able to demonstrate it and share that story with your customers about how precise and how consistent your color is. So the The standards, or the references in the US anyway, give us this funny joke we can make about the Rice Krispies guys, which is SNAP, GRACoL, and SWOP. These are 3 standards or references in the US. SNAP is a newsprint standard. GRACoL is the standard for printing on a commercial sheet-fed press on a number 1 sheet. And SWOP is a standard for printing on publication press, on a web-fed coated press, which has typically been used for publication work in this country. So not everyone knows the joke, but you'll hear people joke about the standards, and sooner or later somebody will show you the Rice Krispies trio and SNAP, GRACoL, SWOP, so we thought we'd share that with you here. Let's talk a little bit about a history of these press standards, and I don't want to spend too much time on it except to give you some basic background. The first thing to understand is that Fogra has been doing this way back into the 70s. This might be a little bit early as we show on the slide here, but Fogra has the oldest set of standards in Europe. They have over 40 different press references for different types of press, different types of substrates, different types of halftone screening. It's a very, very detailed set of specifications and references. The first reference, if you will, that we had in the US, as we see here in the 70s, was SWOP. SWOP wasn't really a reference then. SWOP really just told the color separator how they had to do their work in order for the separations to print on the web-fed press. So this was a way that advertising agencies could buy some ad space in a major publication, maybe in Time magazine or something like this. They'd go to the separator, get their separation films made. The separator followed these rules of SWOP, or what we called then the SWOP specification, which told them about how to prepare the films, how to make the color separations so that they would run successfully on the press. Well, that worked so well that over the following 10 to 15 years, the SWOP standard grew tremendously, giving many more details about what the web presses could and couldn't do. Again, going back to my first slide, so as to better set the expectations of the print buyer, and also eventually with some guidelines about how to run the press. And SWOP was not at this point an appearance matching standard. We'll talk more about that in a second. But they did start to talk about, maybe you should print to this solid ink density with your cyan kind of thing. As we move into the 80s, we had a couple more references come out. SNAP, which is the specification for newsprint printing. And SWOP came to a point in the 80s where we actually did a test press run. That's this TR001 thing, because people said, okay, we're following the specification, we know what to expect, but the community of print producers, that is many of you on the line, said, we want to know what this really means. If we run to these densities, do we really all look like each other, or look like what the advertising client expected? So this test run was done in the 80s, giving us this SWOP TR001 dataset. This is the first reference for how print appearance should look in the US ever, in the history of the US for that web press. We'll come back to where that SWOP data is used a little bit later. Moving forward into the modern period here, a little bit more modern, in 2006, we had GRACoL, a couple new G7-based SWOP standards come out, and these are the first full set of appearance matching references in the US to cover different types of sheets. Again, GRACoL for a number 1 sheet, SWOP for a number 3 or a number 5 sheet, depending on the version of SWOP you pick for that standard or that reference. The second thing I want to compare and contrast this to is a bunch of certification programs, because everyone out there is saying that they are certified for this or certified for that. We hear about GRACoL and G7 and ISO and Fogra, and I want to sort all that out for you today in our discussion. But just for a quick historical reference, there was a certification for a SWOP proof available in the 90s, certifications for SNAP and for digital presses ultimately in 2010 with this IDEAlliance digital press certification. Fogra also had proofing standards going back early 2000s and also has a certification program called VPS that actually predates the IDEAlliance program. We're going to talk in a little bit more detail in a few minutes about the IDEAlliance certification, just because I want you to see what goes into creating a certified printing system. Before we go on, I want to talk about the results of our first poll question. Yael, can you give us that?
So let's share that with everybody and take a look at what we see. So looks like 3/4 of our audience is either using a spectrophotometer or matching to their customer samples. Others have different ways. What are some thoughts here?
Well, everyone has their own technique for this, and that's part of what makes the business as interesting as it is, because some of you do things in different ways and many people are successful doing things different ways. There's certainly not just one way to do that. But I think what we'll see as we go through the rest of our presentation today and take some questions is that there are certain best practices which, if we move towards these, we can get perhaps more consistent in some cases than we may be today with our color, even using some of these other methods for monitoring or these other techniques, which some of them go back many, many years in your shops, and I know that you're real successful with them. So certainly you don't have to change it if it's working perfectly, but I want to talk a little bit about the value of this more modern way of certifying things today.
All right. Okay.
So, to talk about the definition of a certification program for a printing process or proofing system or whatever it might be, certification programs, again, are offered by a couple of industry associations, namely IDEAlliance in the US and Fogra pretty much for the rest of the world. A certification program defines the requirements for the system, and we call it the normative requirements, which is just a technical way of saying the print system has to do these things in order to pass, in order to get a certification. That's what normative means. Some examples for you today are SWOP and GRACoL, but be careful, there's only SWOP and GRACoL certification programs for proofing systems. You cannot buy a press that is certified to match SWOP or GRACoL. There's no such thing. So if you're hearing people say that or your competitors are telling people that, this is an excellent opportunity for you to demonstrate your leadership in the area of printing and in your marketplace by understanding the reality here and sharing that with your customers, that there is no one who is SWOP or GRACoL certified unless they're making, inkjet proofs at a rate of, 1 per 10 minutes kind of thing. Another certification is SNAP. That's the newsprint certification I've referenced a couple times, and I'm not going to go into too much more detail there. IDEAlliance Digital Press certification, which we'll look at in some depth to understand what a certification is. This is a certification for a print system. So this is a digital print system, including a digital front end and a digital press. Okay, this program is not available for your conventional presses. It is specific to digital. Fogra Cert for VPS, that is this Fogra version of certification for digital print systems. Fogra does have some other programs I haven't listed on the slides, and they can in fact come in and certify a shop if you're willing to have them come in and measure all your presses and processes and that sort of thing. So the value of a certification program to your print buyers is that this gives them some assurance that you can match a standard, or a reference at least. Not all of these color references I've described are technically standards that have been adopted by the ISO. But it's a way of you telling your customer when they see that seal on your press or on your door that you match a reference consistently and you intend to do that every time with their work. It also gives the buyer some sense or some guarantee that you're quality minded. Because if you're going to get to one of these certifications and measure yourself and prove that you're there, chances are you're going to measure and prove that you're there every couple of days. So it gives your buyer a great deal of confidence, or can give them confidence, that your color is going to be not just good, but also very consistent. As far as you, the print provider, the value of a certification program is that it ensures what you're buying can do it, right? Not all digital press systems have any of these certifications that we're discussing. It confirms a number of other things, as you'll see when we go through the IDEAlliance one. System repeatability over time, spatial uniformity, which refers to the color being consistent from the left to right and the top to bottom of the page, not even from page to page. Precision of the print engine in terms of registration, which is obviously very critical, and also resolving power, down to what sort of tiny font you can print and still have it be legible and printed properly. And finally, there's some specific tests in the IDEAlliance program that relate to direct mail and that assure that you're getting a system that will be useful for a direct mail application if that's something you're doing today or planning to do. You can see all the digital press certifications at this link, which I won't read you. You can also just Google digital press certification and you'll probably find the IDEAlliance site. But this lists all the certified systems with some details about the press, the digital front end, the substrate that was used, the reference data set that was used, although for these it's always the GRACoL reference data set. And very importantly here, out at the right-hand side, you can just barely see this on the slide probably, it says ADS. That is the application data sheet that tells you how to get your system of same make and model and manufacturer to match the certification standard that was matched for this program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next up here I have a link for you to see the Fogra certifications. Same idea, large number of systems certified, which include both a combination of DFE and the digital press, particular substrate. In the case of the Fogra certifications, these are matching to a different reference, not to the GRACoL reference used in the US, but rather to the Fogra 39L reference, which is used certainly all over Europe and in much of the rest of the world as the standard, if you will. And that one is in fact a standard. So let's talk about the digital press certification program from IDEAlliance, just to show you what goes into making or getting to a certified system. The first thing we're going to do, or that the IDEAlliance folks do when we send them one of these certifications, is they visually evaluate the sheets. Next comes a colorimetric evaluation using this unit called delta E that I know some of you on this webinar today are super familiar with. Some of you maybe less so, so we'll give you a little definition of that in a minute. There's a test for uniformity, that is consistency within a press run. Also for uniformity over the short term and long term, because remember, your customer wants to be assured that the print you sell them today that looks great will also look great if you have to print another set tomorrow or in a month or in a year. So all these things are important. There's tests for minimum font size to test the resolving power of the press. There's a tint uniformity test, which I'll give you some detail on, and which I'll tell you is a very, very hard test to pass on a digital press. It's in fact not that easy to pass even on one of your conventional presses. When you see what this is, I think you'll probably agree with me. Finally, there's a test of density loss during abrasion, again to direct mail applications, making sure that the toner adheres to the work. Some of you that may already be doing direct mail work or have done it historically probably remember the days of printing all those postcards and then having to take them over to another press so you could run them through a coater and get an aqueous coating on them and not have the toner disappear before the recipient of the mail piece gets it. Finally, there's a measurement of gloss, which is informative. That is to say, it's not normative. They want to know how glossy these different presses are, and you can look at that information. And there's a check of the registration of the press, of course. So a little detail on a few of these. The visual evaluation is simply a visual evaluation conducted when the certifying body, IDEAlliance, receives a certification submission, which might be from EFI with our Fiery in a digital press or from some of our competitors. They make sure that the sheets are going to be reasonable for evaluation, that they weren't damaged in shipment, that there's no kinds of defects on the sheet that are going to cause problems, specifically because these sheets are going to be evaluated metrologically. They're going to be measured with a spectrophotometer. So if there's defects on the sheet, or if it's gotten bumped around or folded or bent in some way in shipping, we're not going to probably get the successful measurements to pass the certification. The first thing that happens after this is a colorimetric evaluation of the form. And this has always been sort of one of the central points of a certification program. So yeah, we're going to test all this other stuff, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a moment. But the first thing is, does the digital print system match the reference that you're trying to print to, that you want to tell your customer you print to, and that you want your customer to be confident you are matching when you print? The way we determine this is colorimetrically. Colorimetrically simply means I measure all those patches with a spectrophotometer, and I calculate what we call the delta E. Let's talk about this for a minute. Delta E is a standard unit used to measure color difference, okay? And it's designed to work in a certain space. So I've put up an example here for you where we see these two little arrows. Imagine if these arrows each represented one color difference unit. The problem in this 1931 XYZ space, the original device-independent color space, is that the difference of one unit at the top is the difference between a blue or green and a yellow or green, and the difference with the other arrow is the difference between green and red. So it wouldn't be very reasonable for us to calculate color difference or something like this delta E unit in this XYZ space because it's not uniform. It has a lot more green representing the sensitivity of our eyes in terms of the number of values that are in that model. So instead we're going to use our LAB model, which we learned about in the 2 sessions ago. So the first World of Fiery webinar that you can still see the recording of, and we'll provide a link to that at the end of today's webinar. The LAB color space, you may remember me saying, is perceptually uniform, which means as the numbers change in LAB, so does the human perception equally, or roughly so. So that in this color space, if I show you what 1 delta E is, and 1 delta E is defined as the color difference barely perceivable to the human observer. 1 delta E on the left shows me a small difference in green. 1 delta E on the right shows me a small difference in the red to magenta region. Okay? So this is a good example of what a delta E is. It's a uniform difference unit. 1 always means I can barely see it. Sometimes we want to get down to 1 or 2 or 3. For some other things, sometimes we'll settle for a slightly higher delta E value for our criteria for passing. So if we look at the colorimetric evaluation, and I'm not going to read you all these details, but basically IDEAlliance tells us that for all patches of that target, which is the IT874 1617 patch target, we need to have an average delta E under 2.5 and a 95th percentile under 4, or equal to 4. You'll see here too that all these slides say delta E 00 to the right of them. This is delta E 2000 that is technically used for the IDEAlliance program. It's a much more modern way to calculate delta E. It's far too complex for me to explain on this webinar, but basically it scales the delta E further so that it's even more uniform with human perception than the LAB color space from 1976 was. So this is for the overall match. We have all these different delta E's that we have to match on the spectrophotometer measurements. The next thing we do is we look at uniformity within the press run. So this measures press variation over time. We submit a number of sheets. 5 sequential sheets are measured, and then there's a pseudo-random sequence where they take some other sheets out of all the ones we submitted, and they measure them. Between all those sheets, the delta E must be less than or equal to 2.5 at the midtones and 2.0 at the solids. So this is very difficult, and some people would say, you know, digital presses can't do this, lasers can't do this, it's not consistent enough over time. There's a large amount of certifications you can go look at on the web to see that many digital presses can do this and that we have done it with them, and you can look at the certification for that. Let me make one more comment here before we go on. And it's going to relate to the next topic as well. Many people who are moving to digital, or if you find yourself in a competitive situation with somebody who is purely conventional printer, and they have some magic cost structure where they can somehow keep up with your digital print, even a conventional press, unless it's a very, very new press, is going to have a difficult time maintaining some of these specifications. Specifically, the delta E of 2 over an entire press run. You guys have spectrophotometers. I know that those of you out there with conventional presses could check this if you want. I'd be very impressed if you can keep your whole run within 2 delta E. The next standard, or the next part of the certification that we need to do, is we need to show our tint uniformity. Anybody with a conventional press? Same challenge, right? Remember running those big blocks of spot solids or whatever? Maybe you're making some kind of forms, or you're making some sheets that will be used in some other way. Very hard to keep a conventional press even across the sheet. Also, very, very difficult in the digital space. So for this test, basically, we use the M-score, which is a calculation developed by Fogra. M-score shows me how uniform my sheet is, and basically it's a way of numerically measuring if I have any banding on the sheet or any mottling, which are classic problems with digital printing. The way we do this test is we print a gray sheet. We actually do several of them, but I'm just showing you one. This is a 3-color gray. So it's something like a 40% cyan, 30% magenta, 30% yellow build, a gray balanced 3-color build. We print the sheet, and rather than looking at it, we put it in a spectrophotometer. The scanning spectrophotometer is actually going to measure this sheet in 46 columns and 64 rows on the sheet. So every one of those little spots you see on the sheet now represents a point where my scanning spectrophotometer is going to measure. And out of these 2,900 or so samples, we calculate delta E, color difference, across the rows and down the columns, and we integrate all those values using this formula from Fogra into what's called the M-score. And this is an ISO standard 15311. The M-score, to get an IDEAlliance certification, has to be on the order of 60, which is very, very difficult. And again, unless you have a very new conventional press and you're running it very, very carefully, it's also hard to keep your sheets even, especially across a large form if you have a full sheet press. The next test is density loss during abrasion. This is a Tabor testing machine that basically rubs those color blocks that you see at the top here. And then we measure the density loss. So the density must be at least 50% of the starting value. I know that seems like a big shift, but the machine that they spin this thing on is quite aggressive and is actually designed to test for mailing applications. Any of you that have done direct mail and have gotten some of your Nixies back, I'm sure you've seen that sometimes they look pretty bad after going through the mail. So this test really makes sure that the print will be durable enough for your direct mail applications. The last thing I want to talk about in the realm of this certification, so I've talked to you a little bit about what the details are of how they do the IDEAlliance Digital Press certification. As I told you, we have many systems certified, and I encourage you to go look at the IDEAlliance website or that Fogra website and see all the systems that are certified. But perhaps the most important part of any of these programs for you, besides the way you can use this to your business advantage in terms of competitive selling and telling your print buyers what to expect, etc., is that part of having a certified system, if you already own one of these or if you're looking to a new press and you invest in one, is you're going to go download this application data sheet. The ADS, or application data sheet, must be submitted with the digital press certification form, and basically it gives the cookbook instructions for how we did the certification. Remember, we have to do all this printing. In the case of IDEAlliance, we can do it in one location and send it to them. This is our document that shows exactly what we did. In the case of Fogra certification, Fogra actually sends representatives to meet us at a site, and they do the testing with us, but we have the same requirement. Why? Because otherwise you would buy a digital press system that was certified, and you'd get it back in your shop, and you'd put some paper in it, and you'd say, am I matching to Fogra, or ISO rather? Am I matching to GRACoL? You probably wouldn't know. And if you're sophisticated enough to know and you found you weren't matching, you might have a lot of questions about how to get there. This application data sheet gives you every bit of detail about how to do that. I will encourage you, if you are still looking to buy a system and you look to one of these certified systems, which I recommend you do, you should download the application data sheet for that system and for the DFE vendor of your choice, since it might be a Fiery driving it, but it might be something other than EFI. Make sure you get the right level of detail in this application data sheet. We have made an extra effort to put in every last detail we can think of, so that if you get an EFI or a Fiery data sheet, you can read it and pretty much do this on your own if you have the equipment. So let's turn to a new topic, and let's talk for a few minutes about G7. Those of you outside of the U.S. may have only heard a little bit about this, but I need to spend a few minutes on it because the U.S. group here is hearing about this all the time. So let's talk about what G7 is. Many people think G7 is a certification, and it's not. The only certification for G7 is if you are the person doing the G7 calibration. What G7 is it's a methodology for calibrating a press and achieving a common neutral grayscale appearance. This means that one press that is calibrated to G7 will match another press that is calibrated to G7 in the neutrals from the highlight to the midtone. Okay? The important things to remember about G7 are that it's a great method for calibrating presses. If you have conventional presses and you don't know what to do with your plating curves, this is the answer. It's the absolute best answer. One of the reasons for that is that G7 matches the tone curves of that profile in Photoshop called US Web-Coded SWOP v2. Remember earlier on the history slide I said that the first ever appearance matching standard in the US was this SWOP measurements from the 90s. We called that TR001. And TR001 dataset is what was used to make this Adobe profile, US Web-Coded SWOP version 2. Guess what? Anytime one of your customers, graphic designer, art director, anybody in the production cycle, gets an RGB image and says, oh, I know I better make that CMYK before I send it over to the print shop, they do it in Photoshop. Under the image menu, they choose mode and they choose they choose CMYK. They save the file and they're done. What many of them don't know is that their Photoshop is set up many, many times, more than 9 out of 10 times in the US, to US Web-Coded SWOP. So the value of the G7 calibration process is it makes that color look great on a conventional press that's been G7 calibrated. Okay? It'll match the tonality in terms of lightness to darkness, as well as the gray balance that is expected from that US Web-Coded SWOP v2 profile. So that's the super value of it for a conventional press. We calculate G7 curves using either software or this fan paper that I'll show you in a moment. And as I say, it's a very good application of CTP curves. The curves that you put on your plate setter can be used to do this, to make your press match the gray balance and the tonal consistency of the SWOP data set. Of course, if you do this across many presses, then those presses are going to look like each other, again, just up to the midtone and in the neutrals. So I'll show you just real quickly here. This is the fan paper that we use to calculate G7 manually. Laborious process. Recommend you buy some software if you're doing G7. Those of you that go way back in the industry probably remember using the Jones diagramming technique to link up your scanner with your press, dot gains, and so forth. This is a little bit like that. It's not a Jones diagram, but if you've done that, you'll be very handy with the graph paper here to calculate your G7 curves. Let's talk about G7 with respect to digital. First, let's talk about what G7 is. It's a press calibration method, matches tones and gray balance highlight to midtone, optimizes reproduction of SWOP separations made with that V2 profile, and there is a qualification for an expert person that does G7 calibrations, but there's no certification you can get for your equipment. So if one of your competitors is telling one of your customers that they're G7 certified and they should print there because they're G7 certified, you should go back and check. Probably the person that did the calibration is G7 certified. You'll find that shop has a seal on the door that says they're G7 master, and it's a qualification program, not a certification program. What isn't G7? G7 is not an appearance matching standard. What does that mean? That means that while G7 will match all my presses from highlight to midtone in the neutrals, it won't match all my presses in the solid saturated colors. Only an appearance matching standard, or reference, tells me what the color should look like in every different part of the color gamut. A reference is something like ISO V2 from Fogra, like the GRACoL profile, or like the modern SWOP from 2006 or the new ones from 2013. You can always find out if something is really a reference or an appearance matching standard by asking to see an ICC profile for that reference. If there's no profile, as there isn't for G7, then it's not an appearance matching standard. As I said, it's not a certification standard or program, and it's not a press standard. Before I go on, I'm going to talk about how to match a reference and appearance matching standard on your digital press, but let me just point out here that G7 is built into all the modern US profiles. So if you use GRACoL, or you use one of the SWOP profiles in the procedure I'm about to show you, not only are you going to match GRACoL or SWOP, complete appearance matching standards even for your solids and saturated colors, but you are also, by definition, if you've done it properly following best practices, going to match G7. So if you are a G7 qualified provider, and I know many of you are, and I encourage you to stick with that, then you get a digital press in the shop. There's no need to go making all these curves and stuff. You basically make a custom output profile, set up the DFE in the way that I'm about to show you, choose a G7 based profile, probably GRACoL or maybe SWOP, and then go ahead and run your G7 test. Print out your P2P target or whatever you use to do it. You'll find that that press not only matches the reference like GRACoL or SWOP, but also is already G7. And certainly you can send in a sheet before and after you did that if you'd like to use your digital printing system as the one you submit to IDEAlliance to get your master printer qualification. Before we go into matching here, I want to do another poll question.
All right, let's get that in front of you guys. Let us know which reference or standard you are printing to. We have some of the names that Lou's been talking about, or if you're not sure, let us know that as well. And Lou's going to continue. We'll review these a little later.
Okay, thanks. So how do we do this on your DFE? The first thing is, as I said a moment ago, you're going to need to make a custom output profile. Factory profiles that came with your DFE are very, very good and give excellent appearance of your prints probably, but the chances are that they get you to colorimetrically, that is by the delta E, match one of these references the way the certified systems do, are not very good. Your press, as we talked about 2 sessions ago, is in a different environment than the one where the factory profile was made. That means it has different humidity, different temperature operating conditions. It also is somewhere else, probably in its maintenance cycle, than the press on which the factory profile was made. So if you want to match a reference and constantly keep yourself with a reference, you're going to need to make an output profile. We're going to use output profiling software. Again, we showed you the Color Profiler Suite product that we offer with the Fiery a couple of sessions ago. And you're going to follow all the details in the application data sheet for the certified system. And that will tell you, in terms of Color Profiler Suite, at least for the EFI certifications, exactly how the settings were configured in the software, all the way through all the expert settings, how many patches to measure, and all that sort of thing. Once we have an output profile, the next thing we need to do, of course, we load that up on our DFE, and then we need to pick a source profile. The magic of a digital print system compared to a conventional press is that it has color management. Not everyone understands this, but very, very few conventional presses are sitting at the back end of a fully color managed workflow where you're color managing the data that you're plating. Now I know there's a few of you on the webinar today that may be doing this and you're probably waving your hands at me right now, but that's very, very uncommon. That's why G7 calibration of your conventional press is so important and valuable. But when we come over to the digital side, we have a system in front of us that we would be fools not to use. If we simply turn on color management, make a custom output profile, pick the right source or input profile, which represents the standard or the reference we want to match, we're going to match that reference, assuming that our press and the substrate we've chosen to print on has enough gamut to match that reference, right? Enough color range. So if I'm trying to pass the IDEAlliance certification, basically I make a custom output profile, and then I go into the DFE settings, and again I'm showing you Command Workstation from the Fiery since that's our easy access DFE around here, and I pick the GRACoL source profile. GRACoL 2006 coded, and I'm going to also tell it to use full output GCR, which gives me all the benefits of the black generation that we've set up inside that profile. Again, you can read this from the application data sheet for the press. You don't have to worry about those details. Once I've set this up, I'm going to make a print. Tough question. Did you match the reference? Can you look at it and tell me you matched the reference? No. Can you sell it to your customer and tell them it's the reference? Probably. You've been selling color for a really long time. But if you want to know and be able to demonstrate to your customer that you know and that you are quality minded and will be going forward about your color, then you're going to need a color verification tool. Good news, your profiling package came with it. So Color Profiler Suite I'm showing here comes with Verify. This is a very sophisticated professional level tool. There's also several very easy novice level things. You can just click different places in the software and tell it to verify a job, and it'll print a small set of patches to measure and report. But this is a full report from the Verify application showing my match to a standard. If you look down here, I'm actually comparing myself to the validation print standard from Fogra, the ISO V2 standard, and you can see that I'm passing at the right. Now I know. Okay? The even better practice I could do than verifying my work like I've done here is to verify it over time and to track and trend this over time. So look at what the delta E's are today. Try it again tomorrow and next week and the following week and so on. Watch what happens to your delta E's. They're going to drift. Your device has inherent drift in it based on temperature and humidity and service. So there will come a time, probably the next shift or the next day, when I'll need to minimally calibrate to get back to this reference. And there will also come a time, and it might be a week or a month or more out depending on my environment, where I have to make a new output profile in order to get back to that reference. So I know all this sounds like a lot of work. I wanted to give you some next steps you could think about if you want to get started in working in the area of press references or press standards and these certifications. First thing is, pick the reference you want. Might be SNAP, GRACoL, SWOP, ISO. A number of these could be the thing that you say, you know, we're going to standardize our shop on this, and we're going to print to this on every sheet, on every press that we possibly can. Another idea for next step, if you don't already have a DFE or if you're in the market for a new one, I would strongly consider getting one that is a certified system. Again, you can look these up on the website. Next step, have color management tools. If you already have a press and you don't have color management tools, this is the single most important investment you could make to getting your color into a repeatable, standardized deliverable that you can advertise to your customers and get their, number one, get more of their business and also get more business. If you already have a DFE, take a look. There's a good chance if you got a professional level production system, it probably came with a color profiling system you may not even be using. So you might want to look in the bottom drawer or ask your manufacturer and see if maybe you already have the tools to make the profile and do the verification. And then finally, if you get a certified system, you can follow the ADS instructions from the application data sheet to get your output profile made and verify that you're matching. And last but not least, you can refer back to the 3 keys to getting the color right, which we talked about 2 sessions ago, and which will give you a link to that recording. So before we go on to our last section here, I wanted to ask to see what we got on the poll, Yael.
Certainly. Let's take a look here. Here we go. So we have quite a few looking at ISO, GRACoL, and SWOP, but we also have a good amount of folks on the webcast today who just don't know or are not matching standards. So, any thoughts?
Interesting, we have the majority on GRACoL.
Or
pretty good amount on ISO too. So this is very interesting. Many of you are matching to a standard and presumably doing it successfully, so that's great. You probably know already or have enjoyed some of the benefits that I've talked to you about today in terms of working to a press reference or standard. Last thing I want to talk briefly about before I take some of your questions is one other kind of certification, which you should also think about when you're looking at digital front ends and talking to your customers about your digital capabilities. And that is the ability to properly print a PDF file, which sounds easy. I know you take a PDF file, you drop it on the DFE or the hot folder or whatever, and it prints, and you're done, right? The fact of the matter is there's a set of PDF standards called PDFX that have evolved over the last 10 years. And basically, these are standards for transferring graphic arts content in a PDF file. International standards around PDF and PDFX are designed to make output more predictable. Again, refer back to my first slide about setting the print buyer's expectations and giving them what they expect. You can do this very successfully, and many of you probably do exchange files with your customers this way, by just standardizing and say, if you send me file, I want a PDF, and I want it made to the PDF X4 is probably what you would say is the most modern one, standard. These PDFX standards are part of this ISO 15930 if you want to read about it in more detail, but essentially there were 3 different levels of this. There was PDFX1, which was back in the day when we said, only give me CMYK, I can't handle spot colors on my conventional press. Then there was PDFX3, which allowed spot colors and began to allow color management. Finally, there's PDFX4, which includes not just all the details about color management, but all the details about how transparency works, which is probably your biggest print challenge today coming out of InDesign and Illustrator and other tools where we use transparency effects. So what you can do to find out about this is get a test file like the one I'm showing you here, print it on the DFE that you have or that you're thinking about getting, and in this example that we've created, you'll see there's a bunch of elements that don't render correctly. Okay? The Fiery earned qualification from a group called VIGC a few years ago, and what we did get a perfect pass. These are examples on this test form that you can get your hands on that show you how the PDFX4 prints correctly only in this case on the Fiery system, the latest and greatest Fiery can get this perfect. There's some other things you can do to get this right on older versions of the Fiery and perhaps on some other DFEs, but if you're thinking about standards, if you're thinking about matching to a reference like GRACoL or SWOP or Fogra, you should also be thinking about the standards for PDF, and probably that means moving to a PDFX4 type of workflow. So in summary, we talked today about press standards, and I introduced you to what that is, and I differentiated these references or standards, which are things like GRACoL and SWOP, from certification programs, which are not GRACoL and SWOP and ISO, but rather are from the certification bodies, Fogra and IDEAlliance. I showed you some quick steps to match the reference on your DFE once you figure out which ones you want to match, and we talked a little bit about PDFX standards. So before we go to Q&A, I want to turn it back over to Heather here to talk to you about some additional resources.
Okay, thank you very much, Lou. So here are some resources that are specific to industry standards for both color and image quality. We have a great white paper called Demystifying Color Standards. And this white paper, along with all the resources that you see today, will be made available to you in our thank you email that we will send in a couple of days. We also have a great sample file that you can download and test how perfect your PDF output can be with your specific DFE. And again, we will give you the link in our thank you email. You can also take a look at the IDEAlliance and Fogra web pages for more information on industry references and the certification programs. So here you will see a table that compares both the Fogra certification program with the IDEAlliance. And in case you're interested in more additional details on what aspects are evaluated in each of these programs and their differences, you will get this table when we deliver the presentation in a PDF file. And as a reminder, everyone who registered today has access to 3 online courses in this e-learning bundle specific for color and imaging. These courses, as you will see listed here, include optimizing color and consistency with your Fiery server, spot color accuracy with your Fiery server, and last but not least, Introduction to Fiery Color Profiler Suite. We are giving you the username and password in order to get these courses for free. That's right, for free. So don't worry, you don't have to take down any quick notes because we will be sending you an email with all of these details on where to go along with these username and password. We also have an exclusive offer for you here today. If you want to capitalize on all the knowledge and experience that you have acquired today, we have this Fiery certification program for all of those who have attended all 3 of the color webinars. You'll be getting a 10% discount or $25 off this program. So again, if you've attended all 3 of the sessions, you can expect to get these details on how to use this coupon right after the webinar. And as we mentioned before, we have this Fiery Resources new webpage. And this makes it easy for Fiery users, such as yourself, to find all the great educational resources, downloads, and support documents in one simple location. And you can access all of this information by going to resources.efi.com/Fiery. And lastly, we have another webinar program from EFI going on right now. And these are related to EFI Print MIS and Web2Print solutions. So you will see the list here that we have some of these upcoming events in the near future. And at the bottom, you'll see a link to register and where you can get more additional information. All right, without further ado, let's get to the questions that you've been submitting, anxiously waiting for.
Yeah, so we have a few questions and we'll start in a minute. We've gotten a few people asking about can they get the presentation and so forth. As we stated at the beginning of our day, we will provide all this great information that we talked about, including a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation to you within a few days. You should see an email in your inbox. And if you don't get it for some reason, let us know. You can write to wof@efi.com, and we will be happy to share all this great information with you that we've covered today. So again, if you have questions, please get those going. We have just a few here for Luke to get us started.
Okay, so the first question I have is someone is saying they don't have GRACoL as an option. So someone's sitting in front of their DFE watching the presentation, which is great. You do have the GRACoL profile in your Photoshop, probably. If you look in the recommended profiles for Photoshop, you'll find a US sheet-fed coded GRACoL, I think it's called. I can't remember the full name of it. You can also do a search on your computer for GRACoL 2006 with no spaces, and you should find that profile. Finally, you can easily download it from the web if you just Google, GRACoL profile or go to the IDEAlliance website. You can download the GRACoL profile. So that's half the battle. Now you've got the profile. Put it somewhere on your machine, maybe on your desktop or something. If you are running Command Workstation, I'm going to assume you're a Fiery user, in the Resources tab, so if we go into the Device Center in Command Workstation under Resources, Profiles, you'll see there's a set of input and output profiles. Click the Import button, import the GRACoL profile. Make sure that you import it as a source profile, not as an output profile, or it won't appear in that menu at the left-hand side where you're looking at it. Another question here is about what should I do if my paper doesn't have the gamut to match GRACoL? And the answer is you have two choices. You can choose a different paper, but that's not always a viable solution for your customer who may have selected the paper they want you to print on. So the other thing you can do, and I know that the design community now is really hot on uncoated sheets and matte finish sheets, they're not going to get enough toner on them, or incidentally ink on your conventional press, to probably match GRACoL, to get all the way out to those bright solids from the ISO standard, which is part of the GRACoL profile. Therefore, you should choose a different reference. Not for all your work, but remember, if we think about GRACoL, which is G7 based and has this great, pretty big color gamut that we can print on our coated sheets, and then we look at the SWOP 3 or the SWOP 5 profile, which have progressively less saturated solids, different parts of the ISO spec, but are still G7 based, I could run all my coated work to GRACoL, all my uncoated work to SWOP 5, and I'd still get that G7 benefit of the neutrals matching from midtone, from highlight to midtone. Yes, the saturated colors would be a little better on the coated sheet that I match GRACoL on, but you would be probably not well advised to say you're matching GRACoL and then try to print it on an uncoated sheet where you don't have the gamut. Somebody's going to measure it themselves and find out that you're not able to verify that. The next question is, I made a reference to the easy method for verifying color, and I'm not surprised someone came back and said, wait, tell me that one. Because again, the Verify application is somewhat of an expert level tool. What we recommend you do or teach your operators to do is on a workstation, when you have Command Workstation installed, again, I'm assuming you're a Fiery user, and you have Color Profiler Suite installed and licensed, that may be right on your Fiery if you have a server, any job in Command Workstation, you can right-click and you can say Color Verification. The reason we drive it from the job is because we pull the color settings from that job. So you might want to double-click and look in the job. If that job is set to use the GRACoL input profile and your custom output profile and the screening and other imaging settings that you did your calibration set in your profile for, then that's a very good job to verify on. When you right-click and say Verify, we call this Color Verifier Assistant, and it can test up to 5 things: RGB match, CMYK match, quality of your instrument, whether your engine needs service. Just start with simple CMYK test. You'll get 2 rows, about 46 patches to measure, and it won't tell you how close you are to GRACoL, but it will tell you how close you are to the best thing that could be expected with these profiles. And if you've made the profile right, chances are the best thing that could be expected is very near to the standard. So this is a quick way to get a pass-fail and say, hey, am I in trouble? Should I stop? Or can I keep printing? We do recommend that from time to time, certainly when you first make the profile, and then maybe on some kind of regular weekly or monthly basis, you do a full verification to the GRACoL data set. And again, you can do that with the verifier software. And you can still use a small, 2 or 3 row control bar. Next one is, most of the time I have to select SWOP on Fiery to get a better result. Why is that? Well, I don't have quite enough information to answer your question because it depends on your output profile. But if you're saying that you have a good custom output profile for the paper you're printing on, you have calibrated, all that is set up and selected to print, and you print with the GRACoL profile and it looks bad, and then you print with the SWOP profile and it looks good, that would be pretty surprising. Maybe you're using an older SWOP profile, which I can't think of what the name of it would be. Or maybe you're not comparing to GRACoL, so I'm sorry, I don't quite have enough information to answer your question. If you want to throw a few more details in the chat, I'll try to come back to you. How do I make a GRACoL 7 certified output profile with CPS doesn't have a specific reference target? Okay, this is a good question, and I know many of you on the call can answer it. I'm going to answer it anyway. There is no such thing as a G7 output profile. The output profile is for your sheet, like sterling gloss digital 100-pound cover with the halftone setting that you chose on your DFE. That's all the output profile is. It tells me about the output. GRACoL, or SWOP, or whatever standard or reference you want to match, is picked as your source ICC profile. So they're 2 separate things. When you're in CPS, it doesn't ask you about GRACoL because it's just trying to make you the best possible output profile to give you as much gamut as you can on the sheet you're profiling as possible. Because one day you might ask to use that profile to match GRACoL, and another day to match ISO, and another day to match SWOP. So good advice here, if you're not clear on this still, go back to our first World of Fiery webinar on color, the 3-step one. We talk in there specifically about how color management works.
All right, so we're about time. We'll take one more question, and then if we didn't get back to you specifically right here, we'll get back to you with an email, and also we'll compile a short FAQ so everybody gets the benefit of the answers to these questions. So Lou, let's pick one last one.
Okay, I have a simple one here just because it's quick. Someone is asking if they can use different spectrophotometers like the ISIS instead of the ES2000 or the I1. Absolutely. Color Profiler Suite supports a wide range of spectrophotometers, all the currently shipping product from X-Ray, some Barbieri as well. You should be aware if you're running Color Profiler Suite, we license it to the I1 or the ES2000. So you do need to have that device and have it plugged in to be able to make profiles and verify and device link and all those different things. But with that plugged in, you can plug in your ISIS, and certainly, I mean, that's if you read our application data sheets, that's what we use to do all these because it takes many, many patches to make a good profile.
All right. So With that, we will say thank you to our presenters and thank you to our audience for joining us today. This has been recorded for any last questions that are still coming in. We will share the recording, we will share the presentation, and all the wonderful resources that Heather and Lou mentioned will be included. So look for that to come to you in a few days. That concludes our color management portion of the World of Fiery series. We encourage you to go back if you missed the first two. The recordings are available on our website, and we'll make sure you know where to get those when you get the email. And we hope to see you joining us for some of our other sessions. We'll be covering variable data printing, job management, and so forth. So until then, have a good day, and thanks again.